manga. For many people, it is one of the first things that motivates them to want to learn Japanese. This wasn't the case for me personally until quite recently, when I began to use manga as part of my Japanese study schedule. So, how did I get to this point, what do I recommend doing, and what do I recommend not doing? That is what this video is going to be all about, so stay tuned. Back in 2018, I was in a bookshop in Tokyo, and I stumbled upon the first volume of the manga of Naruto. I watched the Naruto anime when I was a teenager, but never read it. So I thought, given that I already knew the gist of the story, I'd be able to pick this up, look at the pictures at least, and use a little Japanese I knew to work out what was going on. And yeah, this was the case. I could read it, but I wasn't, reading it. I was basically just looking at pictures, and it wasn't really helping my Japanese improve. It took a bit of Japanese learning, a lot of me studying the stuff that maybe wasn't as interesting to get to the stuff that was. For the longest time, my manga collection just sat on the shelf, just gathering dust. And eventually I glanced at it, but I never was really able to pick one up and read through it, like proper reading. That was until about 6 months or so ago when I picked up the first volume of Eden Zero. I'd owned it for about a year or two already, and I'd never actually bothered to read it. So I opened it, and I was surprised to know that I could actually understand it and make my way through. So much so, in fact, that I went on to buy the next 4 or 5 volumes in the series. Now, is it the best thing I've ever read? No, but I was able to read it, and I'm proud of myself for doing so. And that's the sort of thing I want to share, how I got to this stage. So, I started learning Japanese in 2017. I did have a bit of past experience in high school, where I did study Japanese, but I did little more than just pass each assessment. I wasn't learning it, I was ticking off boxes. That said, I did retain a bit of knowledge, I remembered a few hiragana, but from 2017, I started from absolute scratch. I picked up the first 2 volumes actually, of Genki, and I worked through those. And then I discovered Japanese from zero, and I, got into that book series and worked through those. In 2018, I went to Japan, and I was able to actually communicate for the first time, which was an amazing experience. Sure, I couldn't say a lot. The extent of what I was saying was "Eki wa doko desu ka?" but that was enough. That helped. Over time, my confidence grew speaking the language. I eventually got into more and more different media. For example, I bought this picture book of Toy Story, a film I was familiar with, similar to what I did with Naruto. I thought, hey, I know what this is about, so I can just read through it. This was a book for kids, and it actually made it more confusing in some ways because it seemed to only use hiragana. I also bought the first volume of Harry Potter. Again, a story I've read in English and knew about in English, and thought that I could transfer that knowledge to help me as a bit of a crutch for learning it in Japanese. Didn't really work, but I built up materials, and my whole mantra was the more Japanese stuff I could accumulate, the better. One really crucial step for me was developing my knowledge of kanji. So I started off with Heisei's Remembering the Kanji. I worked through that one for a bit, but just found it a bit laborious, and I wasn't really enjoying the process. For anyone who doesn't know about how this works, it basically teaches you a bunch of core, small elements that are common amongst different kanji. And over time, it gives each of one a story, and by putting the stories together, you're able to create a connection between all those little stories and each kanji you see. This worked for a little bit, and I can still remember the kanji for gallbladder to this day. Not that I ever really used it, that I can remember. That said, it sort of works, and it might be the thing for you. But what I found to be even more beneficial was wanikani. What wanikani is a basically a spaced repetition system, similar to what you'd find if you made an Anki deck, but it's all done for you. And that's the convenience that you do end up paying for. But for me, it was worth it. I found it to be worth it. So the first 3 levels of wanikani are free. It shows you each of the core elements or radicals or whatever you want to call them. Then it teaches you some kanji, and then it teaches you some words using those kanji that you know. If you get a question right when reviewing them, it shows you that kanji less often. If you get it incorrect, it will keep showing you that kanji until you do get it correct. There are also levels as you progress through. Now the first 3 are free, as I said before, and there's about 60 levels or so. So you're able to get this real sense of progression. Something that I didn't really find with something like Heisig, because it was just, I'm this far through the book versus this far through the book. When I went back to Japan since doing all that, so I'd gone through Genki 1 and 2, I think I was now going through Japanese from Zero Book 3, and I was about level 4 or 5 in Wanikani. I was starting to see things when I'm walking around. I was almost subconsciously, I'm not going to say subconsciously, but almost subconsciously reading things and starting to pick up on what was around me. Now, it was not perfect, obviously, but a little more subconscious than I had been. I wasn't having to work as hard, and the strain on my brain wasn't as much than the first time, where every single word I had to stop, think about. Now it was maybe every so often. That said, I still wasn't fluent by any means. I wasn't even conversational, but I did find a bit more of a comfort with language. And this translated to when I was working through things. Eventually I got to the point where I figured I was about JLPT and 4 or 3 level. I kept working through Wanikani. I had done lots of things on my own. I'd done lots of watching shows, for example. And one great thing you can do is go on Netflix, put on a Japanese show with Japanese subtitles, and try and read through that. I was accumulating lots of Japanese text as well. So I've got a lot of books, a lot of textbooks, a lot of just books and maps and things in general that I used as tools, resources to learn Japanese and to practice my reading. This is what I did for about 4 or 5 years until I got to reading first manga properly. Now, I probably could have started earlier as well. I just didn't bother to. It's something great now because now I can go on to read other things. I also started reading Platinum End because the anime was coming out, so I jumped on board that, and Chainsaw Man, which I've also been enjoying. Now, is it perfect? Not really. My reading skills still require a bit of having a dictionary open on the side, or an online dictionary, and checking things out, looking up a kanji, but it's a lot quicker process than before when, for example, I knew 1% of the words, now knowing about 50? I don't know. But, I know a lot more. So a lot more is already knowledge that I have versus knowing nearly nothing and having to look up absolutely everything. So that's where I'm at with manga. If there are any you would suggest as well, let me know. Because I'm constantly trying to find new things that I can read. The more variety of stories, the more words I'm exposed to, and the better it is. So what are the benefits of using manga to learn Japanese? Well, number one, they're often made for enjoyment. Rather than a textbook passage which is about somebody going to the shops to buy some radishes, often manga is something that is made to entertain. The second thing is that often manga are about a single subject. While the story might flow and change, there are some central themes, ideas, characters, objects, places that always appear in that particular manga as you progress through each chapter. In that way, you're being exposed to the same vocabulary over and over, which is really beneficial to learning language, because eventually you're going to pick it up one way or another if you keep reading. The third thing, they make manga on so many topics. I'm sure there's manga about something as mundane as plumbing. Is there? I don't know. Maybe there is. Maybe there actually isn't. But what I'm trying to say is there is a lot of variety. They're making this stuff, and they've been making this stuff for years and years and years. So there is a lot out there. So you are spoilt for choice. And the next thing, it's quite popular. It's a whole community of people online who enjoy this stuff. And you also got the anime to go with it as well if you feel lazy or you want to compare how they did it. And, get on arguments online. I don't know how people discuss this stuff. I'm not really a part of that community, but it's there for you if you want it. It's also often quite dialogue. So while you might find sentences that are a certain shape, for example, it's not going to have everything you'll need to know. You're also going to have to probably know a bit of Japanese before you get stuck into it, unfortunately. Which means, as much as you might like to, you can't exactly just pick up a manga on day one of your Japanese learning journey and go from there. Although, by all means, pick one up, give it a go, see if you recognise anything at all. And you've got the pictures. So even if you don't know a word, you can always look at the picture and try and work out what's going on. Just a disclaimer, I wouldn't recommend relying on this, but it is helpful to have there if you need it, if you're able to go back to the word and then remember that word. Manga also has lots of difficulty levels. There's manga for children, and there's manga for people who are a lot older. So you have a wide spectrum of stuff to choose from. So there should be something that caters to your level once you know enough Japanese. But that's basically it. All it really took to read manga in Japanese is to study enough Japanese that I was ready for it. When are you ready for it? There's no concrete answer. I was about a JLPT N3, but I hadn't get formally tested before I read it. So basically the best way to find out is to have enough manga there and just to flick through and check. You might find you can read it, you might not, but it's a matter of persisting and persisting until you can. That's all for today. Thank you so much for watching. Consider subscribing and checking out me on Twitter as well, because I'm on there too now. And that's all. Have a great day, today and tomorrow, and just in an indefinite future. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time. Bye bye.